Chapter 8. Quirrel's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad time in the archive. Come, Quirrel. The pale pink light of Fog Canyon filters into the mailroom through the crack in the open door, interacting strangely with the bronze metal that made up the majority of the archive. The mailroom is sterile and empty. The air is still, even for Hollownest. But despite the still air, there is no dust. There is no smell of stale air. The mailroom is clean and well preserved, from what Quirrel can see, as if the staff only just stepped out. The door to the mailroom groans and catches partway through the motion. Quirrel pushes harder, only for it to jam again. This time, Lem leans his weight to help, and together they manage to push the door just barely wide enough for Lem to squeeze his head through. Lem harumphs.
Can't say I'm very impressed.
Quirrel turns sharply back to Lem.
What? It's an empty room! Forgive me for not being odd!
Quirrel could explain, at least, that this is a side entrance that Quirrel chose because the main entrance was sure to be full of infected uomas and uumas. He could say something about how a relic seeker of all bugs should know to look beyond the immediate surface of a thing to find its true value. Is that you, Quirrel? Quirrel pauses. A short silence, and then Quirrel shoves the door open the rest of the way, picks up his bag, and forges ahead into the mailroom, unconsciously taking a wide berth around the center of the room to avoid the sorting desk that is no longer there. Lem walks straight through where the sorting desk used to be.
How did you know about that entrance, if you didn't use it when you were here recently?
Quirrel shrugs. Without the light of the lanterns, the only thing illuminating the long halls of offices and classrooms is the palest, weakest light of Fog Canyon beyond. Through distant windows and glass rooms, the pink bubbles throw off their acidic glow, compounding their individual low light into one of the brightest places in Hollownest. The walls of the archive diminish that glow, reducing it down to being just barely enough to navigate by. Quirrel considers lighting a torch more than once, but ultimately can't work up the motivation. He doesn't need it to navigate by, after all, and it doesn't seem right to bring more light here. Lem has fallen about a half step behind him, eyes combing over everything as Quirrel's pace keeps steady.
The texts weren't exaggerating then. It's practically a university.
That Quirrel can't bring himself to let go. It was the teacher's archive.
Well, yes, but names can be misleading. You always have to check over a thing to ensure the name isn't overly influencing your perspective on the relic. Remind me to tell you about the black nails sometime.
Quirrel says nothing. Lem, eventually, gives up and shuts his mouth. The quiet of the offices is aching. There isn't even the noise of the uomas and uumas, like those that burbled almost pleasantly in the air outside. The only sounds are their quiet steps and the slight clanking of Lem's unbalanced pack. The chairs and desks had been packed up, moved into more storage-friendly positions. The chalkboards were scrubbed clean and blank, the acid displays dimmed and dark. Quirrel could only guess as to why. The archive was put into hibernation after, when he'd already gone. Quirrel grips the nail tighter. The wrapping creaks on his carapace. Lem, for his part, keeps bouncing between watching Quirrel for direction and scanning everything around him.
So well preserved. How did Hollownest do it? None of the normal ravages of time affect their buildings, not even the dust that should rightly be settled over everything. And with so much unattended acid, surely something should have fallen away in all this time, eaten away at some vital foundation.
The central acid containers aren't on this floor. They're several levels below us. A fair portion of the archive is below the acid line. And besides, it is harmless to the metal that makes up these walls. Undivided attention prickles at the back of Quirrel's neck. He does not turn to meet Lem's eyes. The professor! Quirrel sighs lightly and turns to meet a harried-looking TA. Please, I am no more a professor than you are, but if there is some help I can provide. The jerk of the elevator coming to a halt rattles the contents of Lem's pack. A quartet of uomas float in the hallway ahead, their cores pulsing with bright orange infection, and their surfaces spark with electricity. Lem glares at it like the little jellyfish personally spat in his food. How many of these blasted things are there? Even more in the archive. They were vital to its operation. If Lem's stare was a prickle on the back of Quirrel's neck before, now it has grown into a sharp, burning sensation. You know a lot about this place, Quirrel. Did you explore the archive during your last visit? It doesn't sound much like a question. In fact, Quirrel could almost call it an accusation. Of what? He isn't quite sure. It isn't as though Lem has shared much about his past, definitely no particulars. Besides, what Quirrel had or hadn't seen is not going to matter very soon. Have you come? Quirrel hears in a soft, feminine voice. At last. Quirrel gently moves an uoma aside in one of the brief phases where it isn't sparking with deadly force. With the gentle touch, the uoma is shifted without complaint. Quirrel moves forward and doesn't reply. At last, the voice says. At last. Down into the familiar depths of the acid stacks, metal bars built to exacting specifications, strong enough to hold against conditions a dozen times as strenuous as anything they would have faced in normal operation. As Quirrel wanders the halls of the archive, he can only ponder how much of engineering effort has kept the archive as pristine as it has remained after all this time, effort he had likely never known and likely never will know, knowing little of the practice himself. He does remember that Hollownest truly never appreciated its engineers as much as its artists, and architecture was an aesthetic competition in itself. But on the far end of history, it seems that the life's work of its engineers have outlived the artists. The art and beauty, all considered more valuable, have been stripped down, packed away, or looted. The long mosaics as tribute to Hollownest's pursuit of knowledge and learning were scraped off. The tapestries were rolled up. All the filigree has been punctured straight through, ripped like delicate lace. There's not even a paperweight left on the desks, which stand unused and covered in tiny burns from passing uomas. Nothing is left in the archive's halls but the halls themselves, and the knowledge those walls were built to protect. Quirrel wishes he could say it still resembles a university, but the truth is that the archive's stripped bones resemble a bomb shelter far more accurately, built to entome its contents come rain, hail, fire, or time itself. The archives are familiar, but it's not the same. Lem keeps staring at everything, although Quirrel suspects it's not for the same reasons, and he's hardly seeing what Quirrel is seeing. As stubborn as he is capable of being, it's nearly impossible to resist the awe of the acid writing your first time, and especially so if that first time was in the stacks. Tubes upon tubes displaying a truly monstrous amount of text. Describing exactly how much had been almost a game amongst the staff of the archive, so far as Quirrel remembered. How many books in a tube? How much text in a single tank? How many words are there in a book? Says the archivist. There is a podium, but they ignore it. A weaver silk scroll is clear in its length, as it is clear in its impermanence. Simple humidity can melt ink on a page. The archivist's acid text is, of course, prone to its own delicacies. Although the text itself suffers no weaknesses, the permanence of the text relies upon the glass it resides in. Quirrel looks down at the speaking notes the archivist gave him earlier. They're going off script for their own thesis presentation. But that's not Quirrel's jurisdiction. He'll take it up with academic support later.
Nevertheless, the advent of reformed glass construction in the last century has finally given way to reasonable cause to bring acid text to the forefront as the premium method of storing all valuable history. In the face of the rising incomes for the nouveau riche metropolites, the new functional permanence of acid text dovetailed neatly with new economic resources and a socio-political bend towards the preservation of history detailed in Figure G. Indeed, the only stronger material at this point would be pure ore, rendering pure ore alloys one of the few materials that could destroy the tanks, and one of the few materials that could potentially surpass acid text in durability. But this is functionally impossible from an economic standpoint, and only theoretically possible for short individual messages, as seen in the romantic era of blacksmithery.
How on earth did they sort through this? Lem says. What prevented text from mixing?
Glass was helpful,
Quirrel replies. Lem glares at the acid with a ferocity it did nothing to deserve.
Are you sure this is the best system?
The bug asks. Quirrel has already forgotten his name, one of 1,000 noble-class bugs who enjoy the idea of leaving a mark on history without having to do any of the required effort. So many of those types give geo to the archive, Quirrel can hardly be expected to keep track.
This text will outlast any of us.
Quirrel!
No need to shout, says Quirrel. I'm right here and can hear you just fine.
Lem's eyebrows draw together. His mouth pinches. He gives Quirrel a long, unhappy silence for an answer. And, in that moment, Quirrel is certain that he, once upon a time, had given Monomon that exact expression after she'd accepted her position as dreamer, but had not yet learned to stop speaking of future plans she would never be able to do. And Quirrel realized before she did that she was saying an untrue statement, but could not say so because he, too, wanted what she said to be true. Eventually, Quirrel can't hold Lem's gaze. He looks away.
Well, at any rate, I said,
Lem says,
that we should stick together. I didn't know this place was this dangerous. Any one of these rotten Umas could blow us up.
What a way to go, says Quirrel mildly. It might be faster than dissolving in the acid, actually. Lem grunts.
I refuse to kick the bucket because we got separated and I tripped into a jellyfish in your absence.
Ah, so it's your own fate you're worried for.
What? That's not...
Fog Canyon is the safest place you'll find in Hollow Nest, says Quirrel. All it requires is patience, a slow step, and caution. Nothing here will hunt you down and kill you. It is easy to learn to traverse alone. Indeed, you could walk around the archive without a weapon at all. You live in a city far more dangerous than the canyon. The archive is hardly a place that requires a guard.
When Quirrel looks up, Lem not only has that exact same expression, but he looks like he desperately wants to say something, only that he doesn't know how to say it, or even what to say. Which is too bad, because whatever Lem is thinking right now, it only counts if he actually manages to say it. And sometimes, not even then.
This way, then,
says Quirrel.
Are you here?
Slowly, they enter the hallways that run through the tall forest of tubes. Not a single one rattles. Their fixings to the floor are firm, even after all this time. Many of them are broken, and their glass shards glitter in the dim lighting. When Lem raises a Lumafly lantern, the shards flirtatiously flash their sharp edges. Several walkways are drenched in old acid, their text unreadable and unrecoverable, like what they say about spilled milk or spilled blood. The gutters along the walkway sides gurgle as mangled text slides into their maw, siphoning away the garbage and refuse, the wasted words, the useless books.
And all of this just sitting here,
Lem says softly. A good sign. That's a thinking tone of voice.
All of this history compiled in a single place, not going anywhere at all.
This is the archive, Quirrel agrees. Its purpose was, well, to archive, to lock knowledge in place, carve it in stone, to preserve. He brushes a tube as they go past. It rings lightly to the tune of the acid level within. Important work, he says gently. Vital work. But in isolation, it leads to nothing. History is only important because it is so closely tied to the present.
An archive is nothing but a grave if the words it has aren't read,
says Lem. It sounds more like a continuation of Quirrel's line of thought than his own sentiment, as if Lem wants to trace Quirrel's logic from the inside. Whether or not this means Lem will come to agree with him, Quirrel doesn't know.
The archive was made for one purpose. With purpose comes use. With use comes a conditional state of being. It must be used to be useful. Although its use is innate, it must be used to fully have its own use.
Ah, there's that look on Lem's face again.
Use, Lem mutters. Useful, used, useless.
Quirrel isn't having that conversation again.
Look for yourself, says Quirrel, gesturing at the tubes. This is nobody's knowledge anymore. It is left only for relic seekers. All yours, if you can read it.
That sounds like a challenge.
Quirrel, comes the voice.
Whether or not it is, the archive depends upon it,
Quirrel replies. Lem squints up at the ghostly green ceiling. Quirrel never thought he'd see the relic seeker in this light, as if Lem were permanently affixed to the deep blues and soft lamps of the City of Tears and would cease to exist if he walked into the sea foam underwater of the archive.
It'd be a shame if this place fell, he says slowly. But it wouldn't be the end of the world, I don't think. Even the end of the world wasn't the end of the world. Maybe I'll renovate the place.
Secondary outlet for the relic seeker's business?
Maybe. But it'd also make a heck of a water park.
Quirrel chokes! Lem, for the first time in weeks, snickers into his own beard.
Well, whatever happens, might as well give this text nonsense a shot first,
he says, and squints at the nearest one.
Let's see here. Ogrim, a knight. Oh, stop. There. End thing? Ah! Watch the door for me, would you?
Lem tells Quirrel, half absorbed already.
Admission? Ceremony? Ah! This must be a record of the knighting ceremony, when the youngest of the 5 great knights was formally admitted. Yes, I've got the advantage. I know what the order of events were, and the words are hardly so dramatically changed, so it's only the syntax left to be derived.
Already, Lem's sour face is melting away, replaced by fascination. He glances downwards at the proper display, and Quirrel can see him working out the interface already. Relic Seeker Lem is already understanding the system, and Quirrel hasn't had to say a word.
I'll keep a lookout,
says Quirrel. He places one hand on the handle of his nail. Lem waves a hand.
Yes, constant vigilance and the like. Stay safe. Remember to come back.
Oh, the Relic Seeker deserves a better farewell than this clumsy exit. He'll kick himself later, realizing that he let his last moments with Quirrel slip by, and he wasn't even paying attention. And for that matter, Quirrel thinks that Lem deserves to hear some proper goodbye from him now, since he can't both leave a note and fake an accidental death. But instead, he only thinks about Lem telling him,
"We should stick together."
And Quirrel hadn't even been there to hear him properly, head lost in the sunny clouds. Courtesy for courtesy. Perhaps Lem could not be said to have ever known the ghost haunting his shop, already long dead, waiting to return to the archive where it died. Nothing whatsoever was gained during Quirrel's stay in Lem's shop. Nothing whatsoever will be lost. But still.
Thanks,
says Quirrel,
and means it.
Lem waves his hand again, distractedly, dismissively. Quirrel waves his hand in goodbye as he goes, and walks with purpose. Like he once did on the roads of the wastes, Quirrel travels, for the last time, to find the heart of what it is he longs for. "Is that you, Quirrel?" comes the voice, just as Quirrel begins to see the corpses. Uumas and Uomas, their bells shredded, lie on the metal floor. Scorch marks from Uuma's core's dramatic vengeance are visible along the walls, and the smell of infection's taint is thick in the air. Glass tubes of acid surround him, all the displays Monomon once used, all her knowledge written in her own shorthand. A few have been shattered, and Quirrel steps carefully around the remains of those texts. His fingers trail absently along the glass as he walks. He missed the feeling of acid buzzing with information. The hum it makes against the glass is subtle, but Quirrel feels it as intensely as he's ever felt anything. The light of Fog Canyon has been overtaken by the pale green of the Archive's own acid, and as Quirrel sidesteps the dissolving bodies of the Archive's most loyal protectors, he feels a certain kinship. The only way into Monomon's chamber is through Uumuu's. This only made sense. What use was a guard that could be avoided by taking a back entrance? As Quirrel walked through its chamber, he thought of cutting through Uumuu's bell, hitting that one specific point of weakness he knew about, but was unable to fix, providing the knight their much-needed opportunity to strike at Uumuu's delicate cores. They fight with such cold, calculated ferocity, hopping nimbly between the platforms and along the walls, saving their strikes until Quirrel has provided them an opening. There is no panic, no scramble, no unsure action, only the calculated movements dancing between the bolts of electricity. They turn to watch him now, as though they sense Quirrel will see an opening before even he does. Their mask is as blank as ever, revealing nothing. Their eyes are the deepest of pits. In that moment, Quirrel catches some small inkling of what he is aiding, what lies behind that mask. Somewhere in there is a death count that Monomon once tried to destroy. Somewhere in there is a death count that may have died, but still lives, may have forgotten who they are, but still does not forgive. Uumuu's body is lying, deflated in the acid, floating along the surface, its cores cut to ribbons and drifting in the sad remains of its bell. The stench of death is so thick it covers even the infection and acid. All of Monomon's knowledge contained within those cores is gone, impossible to recover. Even in the best of circumstances, Quirrel could only regain fragments of the reams and reams of text Uumuu's cores had held. The archive itself still stands, but to further Monomon's plan, Quirrel was forced to cut down his own work. "Quickly," says the voice, and now Quirrel follows in earnest. The center of the archive sits as it did before, a few months and a lifetime ago. It squats in its stolen position, placid and smug, in the spot it took from Monomon the teacher. Its theft is even more complete than before. Monomon's chamber reduced down to a shell meant to contain the tank, her possessions and works all packed neatly away into storage. There is no construction now, no noise of saws or hammers or calls of workers echoing in the space. Monomon's chambers are quiet, empty but for the smallest hints of bubbling. No air shifts with the gentle currents of Monomon's movements. No one speaks with the awed hush of a student to a great master. No glass tube clinks against another. No pen scratches out hasty notes against weaver silk. Instead, the empty, cavernous space echoes with only Quirrel's small footsteps. The ugly, bare metal of hastily built supports gouge out the walls, standing like guards from some invading army, ensuring that the spoils of war are only stolen by the proper thieves. The light hangs dim and powerless in the air, shafts only bright enough to show the slow drift of dust. The shelves are empty. The desks are bare, hollowed out. He can recall the edges of hours upon hours in this chamber, talking with Monomon about so much, pleasant and light-hearted conversations, serious discussions of the archive's logistics, enthusiastic arguments about this or that project. But only the edges, the impressions. The details escape him, swept away like sand in the wind over the wastes beyond. A ghost of an archivist floating through this place made unfamiliar to him by the steady march of time. He walks alongside his own ghost until he reaches, at last, the door to Monomon's innermost room. It has been so long. Quirrel pauses at the broken door, haunting the threshold of the room where the tank was made all those years ago, where the tank still stands, surrounded by the many platforms where construction workers once stood to build it. Students and faculty were supposed to knock before they entered, but there's no one inside. There's no point now. And still, as if in a dream, he knocks softly. "Come in," says the voice. He pushes open the door. His footsteps echo along the metal walkway until he clears the tunnel. He looks up, as he has so many times before, up towards the high ceiling where Monomon could often be found, lost in thought amongst her many tubes, and where the tank was built to keep her. Even now, the tank glows with its sea foam green. There, suspended in her tank above him, is Monomon. Her mask eyes are kind, fond, and warmly orange. "Welcome back," says Monomon.
And there is where they've hidden all the records on artifacts. Tricky devils, but not tricky enough. Just because I outsmarted the need for fieldwork doesn't mean old relic seeker Lem forgot.
Lem's voice echoes in the stacks, carried farther than he is used to. His shop had no space for his voice to travel to, and the City of Tears consumed all echoes in the sound of rain. For the first time in a while, Lem pauses in his frantic session of research and reading. Wasn't Quirrel supposed to have come back by now? The shadows of the stacks stretch high overhead, the tall ribs of the hallway extending beyond him and out of sight.
"Quirrel?"
he calls. There is no response. Lem looks back at the tube in his hands, replaces it back on the shelf.
"Quirrel!"
he calls again, and again. There is no response. Even though Lem knows, logically, that Quirrel is in this building somewhere with him, Lem is struck with a sudden conviction that he is alone, and that, for the first time since moving to Hollownest, solitude might, in fact, not be what Lem wants. "My dearest student," says Monomon. She presses a long tendril to the glass around her. As Quirrel walks to the foot of her tank, he thinks, vaguely, that she's so much larger than he remembers. Her membrane shines now, as if from the inside, rather than the soft light of reflection. He also thinks she's brighter than he remembers. She towers over him. Her mask seems to be the size of the moon and just as smoothly flawless. Her face looms forward, so much more vast than he, to come down to his height. "Madam," says Quirrel in greeting, as he always has. "At my side, at last," she says. Her voice is light and cheerful. Quirrel can hear her smile. "How I've missed you. You took your time coming here, didn't you?" "I may have been deterred for a time." "For a time," she repeats, amused. "I've never known you to be so tardy." "The relic seeker moves at his own schedule," says Quirrel, as if he had nothing to do with his utter failure to remove himself from the relic seeker's shop and return to the Blue Lake.
but I'm here now. You are. Thank goodness. Come then.
Quirrel doesn't stake his nail to the ground this time. He'll have to take it with him if he's going to stage what happens here as an accident. He hops up to the top of the tank. But instead of opening the hatch right away, Quirrel catches himself looking up at the ceiling, as if he were here to sit and admire the view with a friend. Below, Monomon's pale face peers up at him, awkwardly angled around the hatch. She's curious, several of her tendrils pressing against the glass-like fingers, like she used to peer at strange specimens Quirrel brought in from the field. Except that with how large she is now, it's more difficult to find a part of the glass that isn't covered in her tendrils. The tank is barely enough to contain all of her. The width of her tendrils now are nearly 3 times the width of Quirrel, and look heavy enough to crush him, as if she's grown bloated with the acid where she soaks. Just as he did all those decades ago, Quirrel tugs at the lever that will undo the hinges at the top of the tank. "Aren't we glad I insisted on those hinges?" Monomon says.
"And here I thought you insisted on them, so I could sever your mask from your neck,"
says Quirrel. Quirrel finishes lifting the hatch they both fought so hard for. As it lifts, metal groans against itself, moved for only the second time in who knows how many years. When Quirrel peers down into the open tank, he is met with Monomon's concerned mask. "What's wrong, my dear student?" Monomon asks. "You look rather unhappy to see me." Quirrel appraises her from across the way. The acid doesn't ripple at all. Monomon's huge face, shining like a massive white coin in a wishing well, is unmarred by ripples or distortion. He's never been so aware of his weight on the solid ground. The edge of the tank is 2 inches from the tips of his feet.
"I am tired,"
he admits. "There is no better place or time to be tired," Monomon replies, as serene as the acid she floats in. "You can rest here. This is where you've always belonged."
"In this haunted building," he says tonelessly, "in this grave of Hallownest's achievement."
"With me," Monomon replies. Quirrel has spoken with Monomon enough to know how this goes. He hears from some other decade one of their long, passionate arguments about some subject everyone's forgotten about completely, some minuscule academic detail that nobody cares for anymore, as they talked deep into the night at equal measure. He hears himself reciting his own field notes to Monomon bright and early in the morning, and Monomon's contemplative, attentive silence as he described the wondrous depths of green path that he'd recorded. This will be neither one of those conversations. Instead, he hears some echo of his own silence from a century ago, when Monomon gave him his nail and spoke of glory and a greater cause. And Quirrel just looked at her, mute, without the words to defy her, but without the white lies to agree with her, and without the will to accept with honesty. He remembers that she asked him to speak his mind. As if that was so simple a task. "We were forced apart for far too long," says Monomon. "You've done so well. Everything that I've asked and more. I require nothing else of you. My mission that necessitated our separation is long over. Archivist Quirrel, you have earned your rest. Your place is at my side."
"Even though you are gone from this world,"
says Quirrel. "Especially so. My use for you is done. Come, Archivist." Quirrel doesn't move. He just sits there, cross-legged on the edge of the tank and staring into the acid, like he did back at the blue lake shore when he stared into the water. The acid pops and fizzes. Monomon's face rises, huge and silent, to just beneath the surface. This is it, then.
Has my life been of use to you, madam?
He asks. Very much so. Quirrel stares down at the nail, as though it was a foreign object, something just handed to him. He can't bring himself to decipher the writing, to reach for the part of himself that eagerly learned the teacher's shorthand, that devoted himself fully to her cause and her archive.
I am sorry that Hollow-nest fell,
says Quirrel. The acid shifts as Monomon moves closer. You have a good heart, it would seem, to mourn a corpse so cold.
Hardly.
Quirrel runs a hand down the nail's blade, feeling its edge.
The sacrifices Hollow-nest took still linger to this day. No, the sacrifices are still happening, despite your plans, despite the machinations of the Pale King, despite all the pain and martyrdom, despite a number of children so horrific you personally destroyed the record.
Quirrel leans back to stare at the ceiling.
None of it mattered, did it?
I had to try.
She had to try? Hadn't they done it together? I was tasked to try on your behalf, then.
And to only you would I entrust such a task, says Monomon. I have had your service from the start, do I not?
Always, madam,
Quirrel hears himself say.
For anything.
And is this not what I have asked of you? Your life to enact my will?
It was.
And did you not agree to what I asked? Quirrel looks back down at Monomon. He leans over the edge of the tank to meet her light-filled eyes through the acid.
In my last moments, madam,
he says,
do me the courtesy of not pretending you asked.
Monomon's eyes glow with shifting, changing, rippling orange light. The acid stillness only highlights their movement in her mask.
I could have no more refused you than a bug could refuse the throes of infected madness, or the rain in the city of tears could refuse to fall,
Quirrel says. There's something burning, sickly hot in his chest. His own words taste like bile.
I could have no more refused you than I could have ceased to love you. And you knew that. You knew that.
Monomon sinks down into the tank, just enough to dim her eyes.
And you asked it of me anyway, for nothing, for a shell of a place that fell to rot anyway, for the mad ambitions of a tyrant who dreamed of immortality, for the foolish notion that an entire kingdom could be archived. You sent me out into the waste, obliterated half my life, and remade the ashes to your will. You gave me a nail and your mask, and I wore them. I wore them like the infected wear glowing pustules and orange eyes. Your signature on a mindless tool. Your very own husk.
Monomon drifts lower still, yet her voice rings clear as a crystal bell in Quirrel's ears. Was it truly so horrendous? Truly so terrible? It sounds to his ears like a question, but to his mind, an accusation.
No, madam, Quirrel says, shifting his gaze towards the dark ceiling above. It was wonderful. My time wandering was vibrant and fascinating, and everything that I had ever wanted from my tutelage under you. But it was you who was not content with that. It was not enough that you stripped me of myself and adorned me with your colors. Teacher, you asked even more of your student yet.
Quirrel stands, too riled up and furious to sit any longer.
You pulled your student back, reeled me in, a fish fish on a line or pet on a leash. You sent me out into the wastes, and as I grew fond of them, you dragged me back into your service. What I thought was my own became yours.
Quirrel laughs harshly.
Ha! I could have been an unknowing tool, condemned to blissful ignorance, to have holes in my past forever unexplored. Oh, what a remarkably appealing notion compared to what you have made of me now.
What?
My dear student.
Quirrel's gaze snaps back to Monomon. She is directly under the surface, only the thinnest film of acid between her and air. Her mask is all-encompassing. What have I made you? Quirrel's chest burns, hotter than ever. Fire consumes his mind and his heart, but he does not feel confused. He is not lost in the throes of memory or surrendered to anger impossible to steer. Quirrel is sharpened, pointed at a singular target.
You made me useless.
Monomon has the gall to not even flinch. Quirrel's fury redoubles. The nail she gave him is in his grip, drawn and ready.
You made me a tool, a fancy blade to oppose an impossible enemy. You twisted me into something that could only be of service to you and your archive.
Slowly, the tip of Quirrel's nail drifts to point directly between Monomon's eyes.
You made me yours, of you, for you.
His hand is shaking. His throat hurts. His eyes burn.
And then you died.
Quirrel feels her watching him, feels her quietly observing, and that gaze has weight, as heavy as any shadow or regret, even though she's dead and gone, even after all this time.
Am I to greet you warmly?
Quirrel says quietly, looking down at his own feet.
Welcome a death of my choosing in favor of a life I could not enjoy, that my travels were never penned by my hand, but written out decades ago under your glass.
It does not matter. Quirrel freezes.
What?
Monomon repeats herself sternly. It does not matter. What's done is done. You are mine, and I made you mine, and now I am dead. What use does this anger have? You are acting like a spoiled child. Her voice is cold and heavy around him, ice water, pure grave soil. He can't breathe. There is no denizen of Hollownest who does not regret their hand in this tragedy, she continues, as if lecturing a stubborn undergraduate who refuses to see sense. But your regrets are meaningless when there is nothing you can change. After today, Archivist, you won't even have an archive to live for. The Relic Seeker will preserve my greatest works in your stead. You could not choose to live even if you wanted to. All of a sudden, Quirrel thinks. Lem is on the ledge, looking over with distaste. His beard swings past his feet and obscures his vision, which probably doesn't help his sudden aversion to heights.
Just jump, Quirrel calls. It doesn't do to think too much about it.
I can break something. I'm not exactly young anymore.
Quirrel laughs.
Neither am I.
But you're crazy.
Then hurry up and jump before your crazy housemate kicks you off that ledge.
If there's a rope or something, Lem says, a ladder, perhaps a convenient nearby staircase?
I'm coming up there to kick you off,
Quirrel warns.
All right, I'm going.
Lem turns around and slowly lowers his leg onto one of the many mushrooms covering the ledge. He taps it no less than 3 times with the tip of his foot, as though the fungus could decide at any moment to stand up and walk away, or perhaps burrow into the ledge beneath. The existence of the mushroom established, Lem takes the bold strategy of actually lowering his weight onto it, 1 ounce of himself at a time, over a long enough period for Quirrel to count 2 score. He then repeats this process 6 times on 5 different mushrooms, plus 1 more to put his foot on solid ground.
Congratulations, says Quirrel. You came down he sizes the ledge up. A 5-foot jump.
Lem wheezes like he's just fought a duel for his life.
Don't sass me, old man. What's your rush?
There's roads to travel, Relic Seeker, places to see, wonders to find, and they won't come to us.
And if they're so sedentary, they can wait for me to get there. Thank you. Aren't you the one always going on about taking time to enjoy the road?
Quirrel can't help but smile.
Balance in all things, of course, Relic Seeker. The joy of the way there goes hand in hand with its destination. In this case, the archive.
Quirrel pauses.
Specifically, I mean that I don't think either of us packed enough supplies for our current pace of 1 mile per 10 years.
Lem kicks at Quirrel's shin, but he misses. Don't exaggerate. It's far closer to 1 mile per 5 years.
Quirrel laughs again.
At least 7.
6.5. Final offer.
We'll still be traveling for the rest of our lives at that rate,
Quirrel exclaims. And the instant he says it, he thinks, for half a moment, the tiniest fragment of time. He could live with that. And Quirrel steps away from the edge. Archivist, says Monomon. He takes another step, and another. Archivist, what do you think you're doing? Quirrel turns his back on her and, carefully, jumps down to the platform below. The metal clatters beneath his feet. You dare to refuse my call? Quirrel stands there, his back to the tank, nail held in shaking, white-knuckle grip. You have no right to refuse me. Not then, and even more so not now. A knight without a cause, a ghost without a reason, an archivist without an archive, a filthy relic without the good sense enough to die before it was collected, and nobody could choose a life without reason. Quirrel turns, slowly, back towards the tank. Monomon's mask stares back at him, furious and twisted, huge, eclipsing him completely. Her tendrils swell and press against the glass in seething knots, writhing. The entire tank is full of her, blotting out all light. Without me, you are worthless, she hisses, and I am long, long gone. Quirrel flips the nail around in the reverse grip, the way he likes it, holds it firm with all of his resolve. You are nothing! He raises the nail high above his head. You wouldn't dare to live! Quirrel's nail blade rips through the filigree weaver spells. White light screams. Webs of cracks race across the glass, and Quirrel twists the blade, wrenches it hard, digging the blade Monomon gave her deeper into the glass, tearing straight through hundreds of years of lacework and spells. He pulls the blade free, raises it again, brings it down. Acid bursts and streams. The image of Monomon's face splits into jagged halves. He pulls back, raises the blade again, and the glass breaks and breaks and breaks, and the glass gives way. The tip of the blade punctures all the way through to the soft liquid inside, and Quirrel staggers. Something groans, something shifts. Acid spills like blood across his hands. He pulls the nail free, raises the nail again. The raw edge of glass shrieks against the metal blade. Fractures are blossoming, meeting each other halfway like pathways across land. A weaver spell breaking the tank apart from the inside, all of Quirrel's own. And he pulls the blade free! The glass explodes. Quirrel staggers backwards as the tank gives way all at once, no longer strong enough to hold the enormous pressure and weight of the acid with such a serious puncture through the architecture. Flying shards rip through his carapace. Acid soaks the walkway and sinks deep into his joints. The entire bottom half of the tank unravels in massive fragments and collapses into the lake below, crumbling into twisted metal and sparkling glass spears to hit the acid in distant splashes. And then it's quiet again. There's acid on his mask, trying to seep its way onto his face. Dazed, he blinks up at the top half of the tank, still suspended from its supports. The shards drip steadily with leftover acid, like rain, or maybe blood, into the pool below. There's... He coughs, clears his throat. There's nothing wrong with being useless. He coughs again and again. He keeps coughing and he can't breathe in the face of the fit. His knees give out under him. The nail drops with a clatter and he collapses onto the metal floor among the glass and acid. Quirrel coughs and hacks and feels something burning crawling up his throat. He struggles for sips of air in the onslaught, sparks dancing before his eyes, vision swimming, vision fading into orange. Something finally comes up. It tastes like fire, as though Quirrel had long ago drank a deep draught of the archive's acid, and only now he's hacking it up into the archive's halls again. It is bright, ugly orange. Quirrel freezes for half a moment, faced with a reality he had been so studiously ignoring. But the fit is not done with him yet. He vomits up more infection, so much more, enough that the glow of it overtakes the acid. The fit sees him too fully to think about what is happening. All Quirrel can do is ride it out, leaving his own rotten guts at the edge of Monomon's grave. Finally, after an eternity, he spits out a last bit of burning orange and gulps down as much air as his lungs can handle. It's not very much. His lungs still feel like they're collapsing. His throat is raw and his eyes still burn. But he breathes. That is something. When Lem tracks down the outrageous racket echoing through the archive, he meets Quirrel halfway out the door, Lem 2 steps from walking into the teacher's chamber, and Quirrel staggering out of it.
Gods,
Lem says, voice faint.
What in Hollownest is going on here?
Quirrel's cloth hat is nearly in shreds. The acid burns have sunk deep into Quirrel's shell, deep enough that they'll never rub out, maybe never heal over. Half his mask has been eaten by the acidity. Long gouges, shallow and deep, streak across his carapace in the after image of the outward explosion, where the shards caught him as they flew past. His travel bag is entirely missing. In one bloody hand, Quirrel still holds onto his nail for dear life.
I'm still alive, Quirrel replies.